There was the article about you and Pearl Harbor. And I put that on my desk and set it aside saying, I look forward to the day when you and I can talk. And here we are exactly 1 year later, December 7th, 2013. I'm a year late.
I joined the Army here in 1939. I was over in Hawaii.
Now, what made you want to go into the Army?
Well, you know, in 1939, Hitler hit Poland. I see there was going to be a draft coming up. I enlisted and I went to Hawaii. They asked me where I'd like to go. And I looked at the map and saw Hawaii down there in the recruiter's office. And I said, that looks like a nice place to go. He said, it is. He said, I soldiered over there. Probably have a chance to meet Patton, you know. He was a colonel over there, and he was a rough guy, but he was a real good soldier, you know.
And what was your job there?
Well, I used to stutter.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, 6 weeks of military training, and this major, we was lined up, and he come out and they asked me something, and I stuttered. He grabbed me by the shirt and shook me up and said, you go out there and drill these guys now.
Really?
I was scared to death, and I never stuttered after that. Training, a lot of them guys just got in. And I had a full-time job, you know, and then, you know what they done? They stuck three stripes up here on me. Wow. And I wasn't even, let's see, I was 19 and I had 3 stripes up there. But I enjoyed that training, you know, troops.
Assigned to intelligence?
Yeah.
What'd you do as an intelligence?
Well, you'd be surprised that our officer personnel was actually spies for Germans and the Italians. Oh. You know, it's surprising. And, but they used to put me in these different companies, you know, and they'd go in, some of them were buck privates, see. And they'd give you a list of people to check out. And you checked them out, you know, on all different terms. And I liked the job, but they put a guy working with me. He drank beer, see, and he started shooting his mouth off that he was an intelligent person. I told him, I said, you better shut your mouth or I'll shut it for you, because, you know, they'd bump you off, these foreign agents, you know. And you'd be surprised of how many enlisted men that was spies for the Germans and the Italians. We broke the Japanese code, and there was a guy on a switchboard up in Upper Schofield Barracks, and he was on a switchboard. Every night, he would send a coded message to Japan at about 2:30. And we didn't pick them up ourselves. Shore Patrol or the MPs picked them up. They usually had a Shore Patrol and a MP work together, you know. And this guy, believe it or not, he was in the Japanese fire department in Tokyo, and he come to this country. I don't know how he got in, and he become an American citizen. Ain't that something? And there he was on that switchboard up there, and I think he was telling them where every ship was down there in Pearl.
This week in Army history, the Army Air Force defends Pearl Harbor in one of the most unexpected enemy strikes in history. It was December 7, 1941, over the peaceful waters of Honolulu, Hawaii. The Japanese had Army and Navy assets in their sights, including Schofield Barracks and Army Airfield.
Second command of 3 fire stations. I was due to come back on the 8th. On the 7th there, I just stepped out of the 21st Infantry Mess Hall, and here's come a Japanese. I look down, I see the hangars flying in the air, you know, from the airfield. And that was just a couple blocks away, you know. And this Japanese guy, gunner, in that Japanese plane, he looked down at me and he grinned and he waved at me, and I waved back at him. We thought at first it was the Navy on maneuvers, but then the rising sun was on the side of the plane, and we knew it was real McCoy. They called me, you know, for assistance, you know, with that. And of course, they knew we had a new pumper, you know, and we was down there working, putting those fires out there in the hangars all day long, you know. And the reason I'm in this wheelchair, service-connected, I got, you know. We had a tanker, you know, that it was all foamite. And I grabbed this driver, and geez, he went over a bump. And I was opening up those foamite valves on the pumper. Geez, I threw me off of the thing, and I banged up my knee. And the medics looked at my leg and they said, "Gee, you should go to the hospital." I said, "I can't because I got too much to do." And they threw some sticks on my legs and wrapped me up, and I continued working all that day. Gee, the next day it was bad shape. Hoses. They're ripped clapboards right off a house, you know, because there's 300 and some pounds of pressure, you know, that water. And them Japs come back, and I told those guys, I says, "Give those planes a shot of that water." They did. And one of them, it must have got water in the carburetors. And he landed over in Waiawa, you know, about a mile away. And he couldn't get that plane running, you know, that engine. And he committed suicide. And then another one up at Cola Pass, he was going back to the carrier, you know. And his engine quit. He couldn't get it going. He committed suicide. And then down in Pearl Harbor, you know, where they had the TBNs, you know, that went out and searched for subs and stuff. They shot a guy down there, and he got away from them and drowned himself down there. Them Japs, you know, they never gave themselves up. You know, they'd commit suicide before they'd give themselves up. They hit a high octane fuel tank. They used high octane for the airplanes.
The fact that there was a particular fuel tank that you were worried that it was going to explode, and you had to figure out a way to sort of empty it to avoid an explosion.
They said I was crazy.
Yeah.
I had a guy in the fire department. He was an assistant chief, and he said that when they was fighting the Russians, there was 3 countries up there on the, and they put clothespins in their mouth. And with these clothespins, when they was near an explosion or something, their brains didn't homogenize and kill them. And I told those guys, they said I was crazy. I said, well, we're going to get a pump to pump this tank out, what's left in there. I says, we got one. I says, we're going to use this fire engine to empty that tank. They thought I was nuts, And I says, if something happens, you won't be around to think about it. And I got they had 8-inch suction hose. And I put 2 of them together, and I told those guys, I says, look, I says, you take and sprinkle water around me, so if I hit a spark, hitting the tank, it won't explode. And in 10 minutes, we had that tank empty and put it in another one. And then I had them fill up that tank, that we emptied with water. It's a good thing I did. Them Japs come back and they hit that tank again. And it was just water flowing out and mixed with that foamite, And you know what? They give me a Bronze Star for that day.
The Bronze Star Medal. Authorized on February 4, 1944, retroactive to December 7, 1941, it is awarded to individuals who, while serving in the United States Armed Forces in a combat theater, distinguished themselves by heroism, outstanding achievement, or by meritorious service.
By the way, that clothespin technique that you learned about from the Russians saved your life.
You did.
How was that? Talk about that.
When they come back and
The Japanese.
The Japs come back and they hit that tank.
Right.
And believe it or not, they said that bomb picked me up 10 or 15 feet right in the air. And that clothespin saved my life. Those guys that was laughing at me, a clothespin in my mouth, the ones that put the clothespins in their mouths survived, and the ones that was laughing at me by using a clothespin, they all died when that Japs dropped that bomb. And I thank that guy that told me about that clothespin, because they had where these fuel tanks was. Enlisted men was on one side, and the officers was on the other side up there, and I'm just happy that those enlisted women left those clothespins on those lines.
So you literally put them in your mouth and just kind of chew on it, or how would it work?
They just put them in your mouth, and there's something about if you're in an explosion or something, your brains don't homogenize, and all them guys that was laughing at me that didn't put a clothespin in their mouth, they was dead. That Pearl Harbor didn't have to happen. At 6 o'clock, one of our destroyers sank a Japanese sub. And then around 6:30, they called into Fort Shafter and told them they sunk this Japanese sub. They sighted this other sub, and he said, "Full steam ahead, boy." They cut that sub right half in two. And then they picked up, a couple, 3 guys that lived, and them Japs, was very leery of those Navy guys. He took them right in and let them eat with the crew, and they told him that Japs had hit Pearl Harbor, and he says, "I got something to tell you." He says, "Me and that other sub, the channel, where the ships went in at Pearl and out, them guys were supposed to torpedo a ship to block that off so the ships couldn't get in or out." Ain't that something? And if those guys that was down in Fort Shafter had a call for a military alert, now see, they had 2 hours before they hit Pearl, and they could have stop that attack.
Things happened so rapidly on December 7th. What was the feeling on the base? What was the December 8th when you woke up and you'd say, "What the hell just happened?"
There was no reason for it to happen,
Right.
because they had a hour and a half. They could have put a military alert out.
Mm-hmm. What was it like at Pearl Harbor during that time period, right after the bombing?
A pretty tough adjustment. When you're in the military, it's tough sometimes, A lot of times you have to make decisions on the spur of the moment. And if you can't, you shouldn't be in the military.